Good day to you. This is Friday, April 19th, 2024 from Chico, California. Today we're going to follow up on the presentation yesterday, which left off me saying to you we now need to locate where time is in geometric space. By doing this, we have the ultimate secret of the universe. So this is a shot. We're going to do this more than once. This is the most difficult problem that's ever been attempted by the mind of man in science, because this is the most difficult unsolved problem in the universe right now for man. So we're going to take a shot at time. Time is the final key that unlocks spheric space because it's part of the geometry. Just to recap, so you know if you're tuning in for the first time, we have two number systems. This is new discovery as of 2022. It's quite simple, so let me state it as simply as possible, and you can review previous presentations to find this construction. It's simple fractions, but on unity, which is the number 1. So you have 1 over 2, 2 over 1. This forms one number. Multiply them. So this is multiplicative space. It turns out there's an object for the multiplicative number system. This is so fundamental, been overlooked for centuries now. So this is major insight. So what does it do for us? Two componency number replaces complexity with rationality. The final step to construct the geometry of the universe, which we did yesterday, is to make sure that the two numbers in the componency are in the correct position to establish the object. Our one componency numbers make the linear number system. See, those are points on a straight line. That's one component number. He has add only for the line. So this what makes 0 is the operator add on the geometric object of the line. It's amazing, and I hope you see this directly if this is your first exposure to this amazing transformation. But in our fractional number system, obviously this is not add. It's the inverse of multiply, which is what we call division. I prove now, as yesterday and many times, it's a different basis. For instance, on the straight line, the basis number will be the peculiar number at the center. This is called the Archimedean. So that's 0, but that's for add, which is for the line. Now you switch. What is possible here is there are two kinds of lines. This is to summarize a lot of information, so this is actually good. A circle is a different kind of line completely. Is why? How can you state that so you can visualize, just remember mnemonic. Straight goes open. Straight is open. Circle is closed. That's continuity. That's the visual image in a human mind of the concept of continuity. This replaces infinity inside the universe. What we are calling infinity, but it's not the actual spatial infinity, which is where we located infinity to be. If you're trying to use infinity inside the universe, then you are actually describing continuity. It's not infinity, it's continuity, which is represented by the circle. Okay, that's our summary for where we're at now. So we're going to go forward. Because this is two componency number, each of the components has a specific geometric meaning. We discovered the meaning of the whole number. This is 2 over 1, 4 over 1, 8 over 1, 16 over 1, all the way to the highest number. This is a finite number system. At the cutting edge of mathematics right now today is the study of finite number systematology, which is dead end because it's using the linear numbers to try to achieve what we just achieved, which solves it. This is the answer, is two componency number. Because now you have two data types, and they are two data types, we're getting to that. What's the other data type? It's time. Time is the other data type. So this is the relationship between time and space direct. That's what we're coming to. The reason to doubt that, skeptical in a pure science mind, is what you're thinking now is, that sounds too good to be true, but you can't find a flaw in it yet. But if you're suspicious, like, why did nobody see this before? I can understand your skepticism, total on that, because I'm the one who discovered this. So I had to conquer every single rung on the ladder. I had to take each step in sequence to see this. So you're getting the summary of that. It's so simple. You have a two-component number instead of one-component number. One component number is for the line. That's called the linear number system that we use in science. What we don't use, I'll just say geometrically, is the multiplicative number system, which has a different identity number, which is 1, not 0. This is for a different object. So what is the 1 relative to that object? The 0 relative to the object of the line is the Archimedean balance, which is called the center. It's the Archimedean balance. Because you're not saying it's a number. But these two objects, the closed line and the open line, are each objects, each of which has an Archimedean. There's only two of these lines, closed and open. You can see that these would be families of lines, and that's true. Oh, Kepler, my goodness, Newton, Boschkovich, all of them dealt with these family of lines. These are simply the two basis lines of the entire system of lines. There's the closure line. This is closure itself. You're seeing continuity. That's why it has no endpoints. It's because of the characteristic it has of continuity, which introduces the new data type, because once you have two componency, which is when you bend off of this straight, it closes onto a circle. When you leave straightness, it ends in circularity. There's a relationship between that straightness and the closure. It's called tau, which is 2 pi. So we know there's a direct transformation mathematically between the two spatial systems. But they overlap, and so they're the same spatial system. I proved that in 2022. The linear system is embedded on the calculus inversion. So that's a summary. I hope if you're interested in that, you study it. I have over 500 videos. So this is to summarize all of that to get the synthesis for physics. So we're looking for time. Because we have two componency and we know what space is, it's one of the component numbers. Here's how it works. You have a surface value which is not 0, which is 0d. And that would be the Archimedean of linear space. No matter how many lines you intersect, which is 4 for space-time, they all intersect at 0. That's a most peculiar number. And the analog to that number in the multiplicative number space is 1. So it has to be the Archimedean of spherical space. The Archimedean of spherical space is a sphere. It would have to be, because it's at the center of spherical space. But the paradox, which has prevented men, I think, from seeing this very clearly, is it relieves a paradox in our mind, because if there's a center sphere, the sphere itself has a center. So this confuses the shit out of us. Here's the solution to that. It's a double paradox solution. I've given lectures on the nature of solving a paradox is to divide it into two paradoxes, which are reciprocal. This often works. It works in this case. To solve, it turns out we are solving two paradoxes at once, without going into too much depth there, because that gets very deep. We're simply solving a single problem that we face right now that must be solved before we can do anything else. It is the roadblock. It is the logjam. It's the nature of time. In the Einstein field equation, which manufactures space-time and relativity, all of these mean the same thing. The Einstein field equation for gravity is space-time. They're identical. But space-time has broader meaning according to modern science, because it looks like it's a reformulation of the definition of space. This is true to at least two extents which are miraculously important, and I want to be sure you understand these aspects of space-time. What makes it miraculous are two things. One is there's an orthogonal relationship between space and time that's established in this equation. That's a geometric relationship between space and time which has been proved. There's a glitch there, though, because of the nature of perpendicularity. It's linear. What I've discovered is spheric. orthogonality. And that's the relationship between the two component numbers in the two component system. These two numbers always multiply to 1. So each number in the system is 1. You could say the same thing about the line. If those are two component numbers, every number would be 0. A moment's thought will convince you of that. That works all the way to linear infinity, that the two infinities cancel to 0. So the nature of the Archimedean of the space is that it cancels the infinities to the identity. In two-component space, what happens then is you put infinity outside the universe. And by doing that, you two-componentize the nature of infinity, which we say is imaginary. So we put the imaginary part of the fraction outside. That makes the reciprocal, which generates the center number. And now these two numbers are reciprocal. That creates the space. In the same way that +1 and -1 create the space of linearity, which goes to infinity and cancels on 0, this creates two-component space, which is spherical, not linear, and the two infinities cancel to the Archimedean, which is 1, which means that the inner surface sphere has an interior, which we now can state the interior to decide this paradox about the two centers, because it's that sphere that's the center. But now that means that the inside is reciprocal to the outside of the inner surface. Okay? Not reciprocal, although I shouldn't have said reciprocal, but no harm done. Let me rephrase that. You can see that there are now three parts to the spheric universe. You have the interior, which goes to what we think of as a geometric point at the center of this sphere. But you see, this sphere we're saying now is the actual center, not the point, which technically would be 0 because it would have to be linearized, because that's the derivative of the circle, is how you would get to the center. It would be somehow to derive the center from the surface. Well, that goes to imaginary space, which is exactly what we need for the outside. But what does it mean for the inside? It means that all the fractional components in the two-component system, I'm calling one the whole number, the whole component. This would be like 2, 4, 8, 16. 2 over 1, 4 over 1, 8 all the way from the surface to the edge. So there is a highest number. Well, there's also a lowest number. It's 2. The surface itself is 1, but that's actually the identity number. So it's not used in the same way that 0 is not used. It has to be there for the number system to be there, because the number system needs a center. But you don't actually use the center. It's representative. Just as the edge is representative, it's the space you want. And the space begins here. Believe it or not, we're going to find this out right now. It begins with motion. That if the sphere is just a 1, it just sits there, it's static. This is normal geometry, it's not moving. But every sphere in the universe has motion on it. That's the second component. That's the fraction number, represents the angular momentum of the sphere. And that's the two componency. And you can see that they're perpendicular. Notice, here's the spinning sphere. Which way is the sphere spinning? Well, if you're clever, you would say it's either chiral or anti-chiral, because it could be spinning this way or it could be spinning that way. It turns out to be critical observation we just made together, but let's overlook that for now because we don't need it yet. But that has to do with the motion. Chiral refers to motion, not direction. It's motion. It's combinative. It's motion direction. That's velocity. Velocity is motion direction. Velocity has direction. Well, it only has direction in the spherical system on the equator of the sphere, because that manifests the motion component. There's no motion in this spatial system. It's generative in the sense that when you create the first number from the surface, you create the two components, right? And the whole component is generating spatial shells. This matches the atomic system construction of space itself. It's spherical this way, shells. Well, there's quantum jumps between those shells. That's the quantum paradox, is what's between the shells. We're going to find out now. It's actually time. and both of them are continuous. So every time there's a quantum shell jump, there's also a quantum time jump, but it's perpendicular. That's the imaginary space of continuity that we cannot see. And this solves the quantum paradox, and I'll show you why. That's a lot, so I hope you can always replay this. There's a reason why my hair is not brushed. I just woke up, so I hope you enjoy this. I slept on this, in other words. Pardon me for patting it, but I'm just trying to structure it somehow. There we go. Well, all right, I'm bouffant today. All right, I'm French. So I'm a fancy boy now. All right. So that's very interesting that the sphere manifests the ability to rotate. So that's the introduction of motion into the universe at the basis level. Motion is one of the two fundamental units of the universe. Motion. You might think, well, that's not time. Think again. Isn't it? How do we know what time is? It's by motion. That's the answer. Time is a manifestation of angular momentum, is what we're saying. We always linearize things in our educational system, so we think of motion as on a straight trajectory. There is such a thing. It is conceptual. A bipolar jet is linear. It's a linear. This is a physical manifestation in the universe. We see it's a double lightsaber. The leaping panther, which is the exploding supermassive black hole, is a bipolar jet of superluminal intense electron-proton soup, because the supermassive black hole cannot exist for long. They all explode. They're explosive objects. This is what you learn from spherical geometry, directly applicable to astronomy. So that was just a teaser, but it's important to know this has context, a severe, far-reaching context, is reconceptualizing the universe itself according to its own structure, not the one we superimpose as a grid. This is a grid, though. It's called a polar grid. But you see, polar uses the concept of linearity in it. Look at my fingers. They're spreading out spherically, right? That's one straight line as a spherical ray. So the concept of the line is dependent on it having a center. There's no such thing as the straight line that we're taught in the schools and universities. The double-ended open line does not exist. But the closed line does. So the universe is not constructed linearly. It has linearity embedded in it, or there could not be a leaping panther called quasar. We are going to solve a lot of problems in astronomy this way. This has extremely far-reaching consequences. And I suspect, I'm just going to throw this in for you super astronomy fans who are beyond me, and I envy you. If you're into optics, especially in a practical way, like you're trying to improve optics for telescopes, the ability to see spherically is of incredible importance in the understanding of the refraction and diffusion and other effects of light. For control, to control light. So, we're getting to the nature of light. But here we're simply constructing the universe, the simplest thing of all to do. There's only two ways to do it. You can begin with the open line. That's the Greek system that we use in science. Obviously it works, but you need calculus and complex numbers. We solve for the need for those tools by switching to the space that's integral. It's the integral of linear space. That's the one and only other number system, the multiplicative space. That's the relationship between the two operators. That is linearity and sphericity. This is one component, and the two component is based on the one component system. That's the relationship. So this is embedded in this. So linearity is not lost. But the spherical separator is the quantum jump off the sphere. It's the equivalent of going from 0 to 1 to get your linear metric. That, by the way, quantizes the line. This quantizes spherical space on shells. So each shell is equivalent to a point. If you wanted to use the linear concept of point, don't use that. That's going to be mistaken in the long run. So these are not points. They're only equivalent in that sense. It's the two componency equivalent of the one componency quantization. There is quantization. That's unavoidable. And here's the reason why quantization is necessary. Max Planck did notice this. So this is severely intrinsic to physics. What is quantization? It's packetization. It's the establishment of a unit that's separate from other units. This has enormous philosophical consequences, a mathematical philosophy, which is not ordinary philosophy. It's the nature of things. It's the real application of philosophy. But it is weird. And that's why philosophy is like the final... You deal with philosophy only at the end point of you're dealing with reality. Philosophy is... Let's not go too far that way. I don't want to get off track. This is so integrative and synthetic that it brings many, many things together so they suddenly make sense together. Easy to get distracted that way, and I warned you against that, and I got to warn myself against it. So we're looking for time. Did we find space? Yeah, we did. We now know what space is. And this actually reformulates Einstein's vision to integrate it. So the true nature of space is spherical. We linearize it, but now you have to stop thinking that way. Sphericize it. It's the same overlay, and we have proved that. So you can be comfortable with this, but it's a great mind stretch. Is that the jump from 1 to 2 is a spherical jump. It's essentially in all directions at once, but that's thinking linearly again. If you think spherically, it's a jump in one direction. It's only in or out in sphere. On a line, it's left and right, which is weird. That does not conform to natural space. So the grid is highly artificial, but the spheric grid is not a grid. It's a spheric overlay of space itself. But it has a second component, and that is the time component. Now, where is it? We found out where space is. It's quantized spherical shells that go to the limit. It's a finite system, so it has an upper limit. This would be equivalent to discovering the highest frequency and lowest wavelength. It is hard to say high and low here because they're actually reciprocal numbers. So as one goes down, the other one goes up, but really one is going in and one is going out. We discovered that yesterday. So what are we talking about here? I don't want to make this gobbledygook. I am a logician and I get caught up in symbols. I got to remember I'm communicating with humans, not a machine, okay? I'm also a programmer, so I tend to think this way when I'm intense, which I am right now. So let's slow down. We have space and time. Now, we haven't proved that time is the other component, but I think you know that's what it's going to be, so I'm just telling you that is what it is. But where is it? To get that answer solves everything, because it gives us the source of time. We know what causes time. Okay, here's where we're going to find it. It's in the perpendicular space to the radial line. All right, so let's explain that. The space components are shells that go out from the surface, which is 1. This is equivalent to the center of space, and we've solved for what's inside. It's imaginary. So think of it as a steel ball or a glass ball. But actually, if you're very clever, you'll realize that because this surface is actually the center, it's a special surface. It's equivalent to 0D, which is where we get the idea of the singularity from. That's the Archimedean of the system. So it's a special number. 0 is a special number in linear space. It doesn't translate to two-component space because two-componency has a different central number. It's 1, but it turns out instead of that being 0D, it's 1P. I hope that makes sense because this 1 is significant. The spheric surface has a value in spheric space. It's 1, and that's the lowest number. You have to disregard the fact that 1 over 2 looks like it's less than 1. It's the proportionality of 2 and 1 that are inverted. So the fact that 1/2 as a linear number is less than 1 retains its geometric significance, But when you think of the number as being greater or less than 1, you're talking about two directions. So that is the equivalent of the left and right polarity on the line. It's not left and right, it's in and out from the surface of 1. So really, you're proportionalizing going in at the same time you're going out. But there is no in. Mathematically, there is, and we're getting to that. These numbers inside actually become significant in hyperspheric space. But for our space, which is the simpler, obviously simpler, it's not hyper, it's spheric space. So the numbers in spheric space are not actually inside. So they're not less than 1. They're equivalent to 1 in the same way that the shells remain equivalent to 1 on their reciprocal. But where is the reciprocal? It's perpendicular. The generation of the shells is the extension of the radial line, which is going in all directions. And you see those are perpendicular. The ray that comes out is one ray. And at the surface of the ray, which is a pressure, this would be a force. This has an analog in physics. It's a direct expression of a physical principle of force balance. So we're getting to the heart of mechanical physics. Because we've introduced motion, this ray is expressive of a force, a pressure, going out like my fingers are doing now. That's called centrifugal force. Where is it? I'm doing this, but actually, this is one way of doing this, which is stretching the surface. The surface can only stretch from an internal pressure. So the expansion of space mathematically is one aspect of reality, is the expansion of space. I hope that triggers something in your mind, but we're not going there right now. The true meaning of the expansion of space is the result of centrifugal pressure, because it's increasing space. It's mathematical, but this is how we can conceive mathematically and geometrically and physically the expanding sphere. There's the radial line, which is a pressure. There's the surface, which is space itself. And these shells are what are left behind that totally fill space, the same way that numbers fill the line. Those numbers are separate. That can be proved. It was in effect proved by Georg Cantor as his failure. He should have seen this to begin with and never tried to do what he did. But he was working on the infinities of linear space for a specific reason, which gets quite convolute. He did, I don't want to say again, but he did die in an insane asylum, and no one's sure why. Okay. So instead of quantizing the line with single component numbers, we're quantizing real space with two component numbers. And the spatial component we can see is expansive. So there's another component to the number. What's it doing? It's getting smaller as this number is getting larger. That's how we think of it linearly. But another way to say it is, as this surface is generating, another surface is generating. We need to discover the relationship between those two generators. Space is generated on the increasing value 2, 4, 8, 16, if we're doing it harmonically, which I think is simplest for now. We haven't established the metric yet. This is interesting to go over again how to construct a space, because we're simply recapitulating what we've already done for linear space. Exactly, step by step, the same way. But with two componency, obviously there's something new. That's time. That's time. In other words, our linear geometry is only spatial, and it never was anything else. But in the natural construction of universal space spherically, using the second, really the integral number system, this two componency number system, that's spherical instead of linear? Well, that incorporates the concept of time which is involved in motion, which is on the sphere. That's the other dimension. This is the spatial dimension. It has the characteristic of generating out from the surface. But don't forget, you could be coming in from the outside. And that's generating the same space going out to in. It's decreasing, it's all it is. You reverse direction. Well, those are the two directions in spherical space, except in the constructor. The space itself has an in-out chirality. That's the right way to say it. So that's the valence of the system. The valence in linear space is plus minus. That has strong meaning in electrodynamics, which now completely changes meaning due to the basis system, which has based on perpendicularity. James Clerk Maxwell saw that and formulated it that way. That's why we're always talking about the right-hand rule for chirality, is because you need to know which way this is going in order to get the perpendicular line of electricity. This is conceived as magnetism. And this line going through is the electron flow, electricity. Those are perpendicular. Magnetism is perpendicular to electricity. That has enormous consequences, a direct relationship with what we're talking about perpendicularity built into the spherical system. So this is a direct match on electrodynamics. It's a direct match on everything. You're going to find that out. So this is where it starts to exfoliate, and you start to see the implications of this geometry. Ultra explanatory. So, where's time? And then we're going to close this off because we're past a half an hour. I hope you're enjoying this. I certainly am, but let's get it now. You see that this is on the surface of 1. So this circle, we're saying, represents the number 1. Don't forget, the circle and the sphere, the way I use them at this level, are the same. The circle and the sphere are the same. Now, they're not, and here's why. You may say, don't tell us that. That's ridiculous. Here's the relationship. The surface of the sphere is actually the number 1, but the circle defines the sphere. So there is they're not the same, but aren't they? The sphere itself is rotating, right? That's where we get angular momentum from, is natural spheric rotation. So this is the energy component of the universe. The true relationship is not between space and time as physical things. If you're going to say that space is physical, then what Albert Einstein actually did was orthogonalize space not with time, but with energy. The reason he was able to say it was time is that time is a derivative of energy. And here's why. If you understand that energy is angular momentum, and that will be the net result of this vision. So consider this to be a vision of where energy, motion, angular momentum exist. This will be the location of time. But time is a peculiar quantity. And it's been lampooned, and then a lot of, let's solve that. The same way we solved the whole rigmarole about infinity, it confuses people. Well, so does time. Here's how to get the solution so you're never confused about the idea of time again. It takes practice. But once you know where time exists, it's part of the energy system, not the spatial system. The spatial system here are these shells going out. That's space. But as the shells are propagating out, think of it as motion, an expanding sphere. As the sphere is expanding and filling space with numbers, really, we're generating, this represents one of the component numbers. It's the spatial number. What's the other number? As this happens, the sphere is rotating, and there's a direct relationship between the two. So now the energy component, which is generating the motion, This puts the angular momentum component onto the surface so that now we've unitized energy. This is what we wanted. So energy can now be conceived as being on the sphere. How? It's on the circle. How? The fractionalization of the rotary component. And that's the other dimension, is time. We measure this in time. We measure this in space. This is generating space itself. This is generating time itself. But it's not time itself. This is space itself. But this is not time itself. It's a component of what's happening. There are two things happening when a circle is manifest, because a circle is a two-component number, the same format as a spherical number. This goes to the root of why I keep insisting that the circle and the sphere are almost identical. In other words, the surface of the sphere is not the same kind of sphere as spatial, as what's above it. The surface is not the same as the space. The surface is the intersection of the two componency, at which disintegrates both of them down to their native interface, is on the surface of the sphere, because it has sphericity on it, so it captures space that way. But because it's rotating, it has another component in the perpendicular direction. It is perpendicular because it's the motion itself that we're looking at now, not space. We're looking at the motion as if there were no sphere. It's just the motion itself that semi-constitutes the sphere. In other words, the sphere is both space and motion. That's why the sphere, having the number 1, is light speed. It's the intersection of space and time, is the surface of the sphere. What's outside the surface, all the way to the edge, is space. But in the perpendicular dimension, they're always related. And it's a transspatial, transtemporal relationship. But it's bound to the nature of spheric space itself. And this ultimately gives us the clue to the quantum paradox, which will be in the next presentation. To summarize what we learned here, we've introduced the energy component of the universe as the other component, so that these two numbers represent space and energy. And it's the energy, we're calling it energy because it's the physical name. Energy is motion. Energy is centrifugal force. Energy is angular momentum. These are all characteristics of the motion, which is not spatial. That's the other dimension. So how does time figure into energy? Watch my finger on the equator circle. It's going around. Now listen. Click, click, click. That's time. Click, click. And the duration between clicks, click, click, click. The duration is the event separation on 1. The space separation on 1 generates the universe. Without motion, it's just generating space. But because this implies motion, that's this. And so look again. Click, 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 click. That's relativity. We'll be right back. I hope you stay tuned. This is Anagalactic bringing you